Warning: since I am listing my favorite episodes from this show, I might reveal some spoilers throughout each episode. So if you have not seen this show or any of the episodes I've mentioned, then feel free to watch the show before viewing this video. But if you have seen this show before and all the episodes from the show, then keep watching. The Angry Beavers was a Nicktoon that premiered on Nickelodeon in 1997 and was created by Mitch Scour, who also briefly worked on Garfield Friends. The Angry Beavers was basically a show about two beaver brothers named Norbert and Daggett who had to move out of their parents' dam after their sisters were born, since it's the beaver way for the first litter of beavers to move out if the second litter of beavers comes in. And this show basically revolves around the wild and crazy adventures that Norbert and Daggett have while they are living on their own. Out of all the Nicktoons I have seen during the 90s, The Angry Beavers was probably one of my most favorite Nicktoons for many reasons. For one reason, I really enjoy the humor in this show, as it was truly unique for its time. The humor in this show is pretty much based on absurd humor, which is whenever Norbert and Daggett try to do something so simple, like stay up all night or meet a new friend, it always turns into a crazy adventure. Like in one of the episodes, Daggett is usually dressing up as Muscular Beaver, and then a few seconds later, he and Norbert, who is Baron Bad Beaver, have to fight a giant splinter that is terrorizing the town. Basically, the humor on the Angry Beavers is mainly focused on the crazy antics of Norbert and Daggett, so there is barely any gross humor on the show, which just means just fine since I'm not a huge fan of gross humor. So today's video is where I list my top 10 favorite episodes of the Angry Beavers, and here it is. Number 10. Oh Brother. In this episode, when Norbert and Daggett start looking at some old home movies, one of the videos showed the birth of Norbert and Daggett, and it was shown that there appears to be two Norberts being born. Norbert then begins to think that Daggett is not his real brother due to the video, and he starts contacting a beaver who he believes is his real brother. And it turns out that a refined beaver named Byron, who looks exactly like Norbert except he has more teeth and spikier hair, claims that he is Norbert's real brother, while he claims that his other brother Randy, who looks exactly like Daggett, only dumber, is Daggett's real brother. Unfortunately, Norbert soon realizes all he is cracked up to be, as he beats Norbert at everything and does things better than Norbert. Now, I will admit that when I first saw this episode, I was asking myself about how Norbert could not notice that Daggett is his brother. I mean, their parents are of a different color, such as their dad having the same yellow fur as Norbert, and the mom having the same fur color as Daggett. But the best thing about the show is that it knows how to be smart about these situations. And the scene where Norbert finds out another baby that looks like him on a videotape really made this aspect really stand out. One thing that really stood out for me in this episode was the fact that up until now, there was no other character that could do things better than Norbert, until Byron shows up and starts outdoing Norbert in every activity they participate in. It was interesting seeing how Norbert is outdone by another character and how that upsets him, since Byron constantly gloats in his face about it. I also love the cute little message that runs through this episode, which was, a brother is someone you grew up with and who loves you, which was constantly stated by Daggett, and even though the episode's approach to the message was hilarious, it really taught you about the true essence of sibling love, and that no matter what your brother or sister look like, or if they act differently for you still love them no matter what. Number 9. Ifyu's Sisters. In this episode, Daggett and Norbert gets a special visit from their younger sisters Stacy and Chelsea, and even though they did everything to please them, Daggett and Norbert can't stop fighting each other long enough to enjoy the sisters' stay. This episode was really special to me because it was the first time that we actually got to see Daggett and Norbert's younger sisters for the first time. Just seeing Daggett and Norbert catering to their sisters' needs and trying everything they could to make their visit enjoyable was very heartwarming, since it shows that they clearly care about the sisters. I also love seeing that Stacy and Chelsea got along much better than their brothers ever did, and it was great seeing them be the ones who tried to keep the peace between Norbert and Daggett. But what really made this episode truly special was the fact that the voice actresses who voiced Stacy and Chelsea were none of them creator Miss Scour's own two daughters, Stacy and Chelsea Scour, and it really brought that familiar feel to this episode. Number 8. I Dare You. In this episode, when Daggett and Norbert start to outdo each other in performing dangerous dares, they meet up with the old mystical beaver who tells them that they must perform several odd and dangerous dares, or else they would have to wear a kick me sign on their backs. This was truly an episode I really enjoyed because it was so hilarious seeing the different kinds of dares that Daggett and Norbert have to go through, such as meeting 100 strangers. I also love that towards the end, Daggett and Norbert were willing to save each other when the dare goes too far and they are forced to gnaw down a log that is hovering over a volcano while they are still standing on it while coyotes gnawed on their armpits. Number 7. Up All Night. In this episode, once Daggett and Norbert realize that they are finally on their own, and their parents no longer tell them what to do, they decide to stay up late and do all kinds of crazy activities, like watch horror movies and do prank phone calls. This episode basically details a child's fantasy and stay up late as long as they want, without their parents telling them to go to bed, which was a fantasy I had ever since I was a child. And the fact that Daggett and Nora were finally on their own and realized this little fact made this episode even more memorable to watch. I love the many activities that Daggett and Norbert did together, especially the scene when Norbert and Daggett watching old black and white horror movies, which becomes a major highlight in the show in future episodes. Probably the best scene in the entire episode was the ending, when Daggett and Norbert stayed up so late that they ended up in the future. That scene was so bizarre, yet hilarious at the same time, as Daggett and Norbert had to come to terms with what had just happened, and the audience would be wondering the same thing also at the end. Number 6. Food of the Clods. In this episode, Norbert decides to stay up and watch horror movies all night while eating large amounts of junk food. Unfortunately, horror movies and loads of junk food cause Norbert to sleepwalk in the middle of the night, creeping out Daggett at every moment. So when Norbert's sleepwalking goes too far, it's up to Daggett to stop this insanity. This episode was hilarious and dramatic in that typical Angry Beavers style that really made me enjoy this episode so much. The scenes where Norbert starts sleepwalking is done in a very creative fashion. Especially the scene when Norbert pretends he is a Viking woman, and he is dressed in a little miniskirt and wears this place on his chest while chasing Daggett around with a small axe. I also love the scenes when Norbert starts eating loads of junk food while watching horror movies, because I'm a sucker for shows that have episodes where the characters eat a lot of food, and Norbert certainly eats a lot of junk food in this episode. Number 5. Fancy Prance. In this episode, Norbert has a dream of becoming a Rabbitearsblog stallion one day, and Daggett wants to make Norbert's dream come true by helping him train to become a graceful stallion. Can Norbert become a great stallion? Watch this episode to find out. This episode was so memorable to me because it shows how determined Norbert is in going for his dream of becoming a Rabbitearsblog stallion. Now you're probably thinking, why would a beaver want to be a horse? I will admit that was the first thought that came to my head when I first saw this episode, but given the surreal nature of the show, I found this to be very amusing yet interesting at the same time. I love the trials that Norbert has to go through to become a great stallion, such as drinking soup without tripping, slurping, or belching, which is my favorite moment in the entire episode. I also love the scenes of Daggett helping out Norbert with fulfilling his dream, as it truly shows brotherly love between these two beaver brothers. And I enjoy the theme that this episode presented. Even though there were times when Norbert wanted to give up since he made some mistakes in attempting to shoot for his dreams, he never gave up, and still continued to pursue his dreams, and his great message that if you want to pursue your own dreams, don't ever give up and keep trying. Number 4. Bummer of Love. In this special little episode, Norbert meets Tree Flower for the first time, as Norbert and Daggett's little beaver pond is overtaken by a rock concert, where Daggett constantly tries to gatecrash the concert while Norbert falls in love with Tree Flower and spends some quality time with her. What was so entertaining about this episode was the fact that not only was this the first appearance of Norbert's love interest Tree Flower, but it had one of the show's most memorable songs, I Think I Like You. I really loved the way that there were psychedelic colors being shown during this song, as it made the song astonishing to look at, and seeing the cute relationship starting out between Norbert and Tree Flower was truly memorable. I also love how this episode had many references to music concerts that were held during the 1960s, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the creators of the show stated that this episode was inspired by the Woodstock concerts. Number 3. Beaver Fever. In this episode, Norbert and Daggett become big-time disco stars when a talent scout spots them performing their song Beaver Fever in the forest. However, can Norbert and Daggett still remain disco stars once they stop fighting over who wrote the song in the first place? This episode is definitely one that truly defines the creative musical flair in this series. I just love the song Beaver Fever, as it is catchy and the lyrics are just so hilarious. It was also amazing how Nick the Cave voice of Norbert and Richard Horvitz voice of Daggett were able to sing so brilliantly when they were both singing to the lyrics of Beaver Fever. The numerous references to the Beatles were very hilarious to look at and gave this episode very memorable and creative flair. My favorite scene was doing the scene where Daggett tells the news press that the Beavers are bigger than sliced bread, which parallels the incident in real life when John Lennon made the statement about the Beatles being bigger than Jesus. Number 2. The Day the World Got Really Screwed Up. In this episode, Daggett and Norbert go out trick-or-treating on the day before Halloween. Why? So they could get more candy. Unfortunately, the neighbors all think that they are crazy for doing this stunt, so Daggett and Norbert go to a creepy mansion where it ends up that their favorite horror film star, Oxnard Montalvo, happens to be in. Unfortunately, Norbert and Daggett find out that the movie monsters are attacking Oxnard and his crew, and it's up to the Beavers to save the day. Out of all the episodes of the Angry Beavers I've seen, The Day the World Got Really Screwed Up was probably the most hilarious episode I've seen. This was also the very first and last episode to be a full 30-minute episode, since most of the Angry Beavers episodes were 2 15-minute episodes. This is obviously a classic episode of the Angry Beavers, because the humor in this episode is way over the top, but really hilarious at the same time. What was the most interesting aspect of this episode was the fact that the animation was stellar because it blended the cartoonish style of Norbert and Daggett along the realistic style of Oxnard Montalvo and his crew, and together it made this episode a delightful treat to watch. Also, this episode has the best scenes that ever graced upon the Angry Beavers, as they were hilarious and creatively done. My favorite scenes were during the scene where Toluca, Oxana Matava's lady lover, falls off the stairs and Oxana tries to catch her, but she ended up on the floor instead. And I also love the moments where the characters would contract whatever phrases they are saying, such as Toluca stating that her ankles are broken, but she is alright. And my number one favorite Angry Beavers episode is Faking It. In this episode, Norbert doesn't want to work on the dam, so he pretends that he has contracted a terrible disease and has Daggett wait on him hand and foot. However, Daggett suddenly gets fatally ill and Norbert has to wait on him hand and foot. Or is Daggett faking this illness also? This is easily my most favorite episode out of the entire show. What made this episode stand out from all the other Angry Beavers episodes was the fact that it showed how much Norbert and Daggett truly care for each other, especially during times when one of them has their life in danger. I love seeing the concerns that both Norbert and Daggett showed when one of them was sick and they tried desperately to take care of each other. Probably the most dramatic scene was of Norbert worrying so much about Daggett's health, and when it seems like Daggett was dying, the scene when Norbert was howling with pain was so well done. I especially love the scene afterwards where Norbert gets really angry when he finds out that Daggett was faking it, because not only does it show how scary Norbert can be when he's angry, but it shows how much he was worried about Daggett. Probably the best scene in the entire episode was the ending, when Norbert and Daggett started making up with each other at the end of the episode, since it's rare that they would start making up with each other after the usual hijinks. Even though this is my top 10 favorite episodes of the Angry Beavers, I have many more episodes that I really enjoy but didn't really make the list, so here are some honorable mentions. Passion On. This episode was about Norbert and Daggett telling campfire stories while each character tells their own versions of what happened to Double O Beaver. This episode was interesting because I love seeing all the different types of stories that each character relates to the audience. My favorite story being of how Treeflower envisions the Double O Beaver story as an anime-style story that strongly resembles Sailor Moon. A Little Dad Do You. This episode is about how Norbert and Daggett's father comes for a visit and turns their lives upside down. This episode was great because it was the first time that we get to see Norbert and Daggett's father actually have a more major role than he did in his previous appearances, Born to Be Beavers and If You Insisters. Same time last week. This episode was about how Daggett constantly annoys Norbert with his handy annoy your brother calendar and ends up getting bopped into the previous week. You know when someone gets angry at you and they threaten that they would hit you into last week? Well, this episode takes that saying quite literally, as Norbert does bop Daggett into last week, and it was interesting seeing Daggett still annoy Norbert despite the fact that Norbert keeps on bopping him to the previous week over and over again. Fantastic Voyage. This episode is about how scientist number 1 and Pete decide to make Daggett into a giant beaver so that they could explore inside his body, and it's up to Norbert to save Daggett. I really enjoyed this episode because not only am I a fan of plot lines where various characters go inside another character's body, but it was great seeing Norbert go to such lengths to save Daggett from scientist number 1 and Pete. Well, these are my top 10 favorite episodes of the Angry Beavers, and feel free to tell me your top 10 episodes from this show, and I will continue making more of my top 10 favorite episodes from other shows in the near future. This is Rabbitearsblog, and I'll see you later.